talk about the often misunderstood concept of privilege. Oppression is the flip side of privilege, so whenever one group has less power, another group has more power as a result. That's the group with privilege. Like oppression, privilege is structural. It happens across societies as a whole. It happens in institutions. It's built into those institutions. So it's not just about people's beliefs or the way individuals act. It's about the way the system as a whole is designed. And like oppression, we're talking about groups here. Privilege is often invisible to the people who hold it. So one example of privilege in our society is not having to worry about sexual violence. Men typically are far less likely to be the victims of sexual violence and are far less often portrayed as the victims. And so women are often in a position where they feel fear, where they are given warnings, where they carry things like rape whistles and pepper spray and so forth, know techniques like when to lock your car doors and checking in the back seat and carrying your keys between your knuckles and so forth when you're walking somewhere dark. And that's a stress or a worry that doesn't exist for men. And because it doesn't exist for men, typically men don't even know about this. They don't even know that this is something that is commonly a worry or concern for women. I like the quote that privilege is the non-experience of not being punched. And to people that have experienced privilege, sometimes equality can feel like they're being oppressed. It can feel like they're losing something that they didn't even know they had, and so that feels like they're being oppressed, and people often complain about that. Another example of the invisibility of privilege here is the way that stores work. As a white person, when you enter a store, you're treated typically as a customer. You're treated as if you're there to buy something, especially if you're a middle-class white person. Whilst if you're a person of color, a black person, you walk into a store, all too often treated with suspicion, again, especially if you're more working class in the way you present. Often followed by security guards, asked to check bags, that kind of thing. And because the obvious thing to expect when you walk into a store is to be treated by as a customer, to many white people, it doesn't occur to them that anyone would be treated differently. Some of the many misconceptions about the way oppression and privilege work. First of all, within any particular group, individuals might have very different power levels and do. So if you look at a group of people who are oppressed, like women, there are obviously some women who are very rich, very powerful relatively. There are some women who have very little power. Neither of that is evidence that the group as a whole is oppressed or privileged. Within the group there's a lot of difference, but we're looking society-wide. What we're finding is, on average, men have more power than women have, which is why we say women are oppressed in our society. It doesn't mean that privileged individuals' lives are easy. Look, life is just tough in general, and many of us face many challenges, and people, for example, who have white privilege may face many other forms of oppression. They may be oppressed because they're disabled. They may be oppressed because they're working class, because they're poor. They might face all kinds of challenges, but the point of saying they have white privilege is to say that their race is not one of those challenges, right? So when we say that someone has privilege, that doesn't mean that they don't face any challenges in life. It just means they don't face challenges as a result of being a member of the group that we're talking about, and in fact face advantages because of that, right? Where someone who faces all the same challenges as them but is oppressed in the other category as well will face even more as a result. There are many factors that go into an individual's power level. We're going to talk more about that later, but someone who is oppressed in some ways may have many other aspects of them that give them relative privilege. It's not a statement of ethical value. To say that someone is privileged is not to say that they're a bad person. That's something we don't choose, right? It's social-wide. We don't choose how we're born. But we do choose what to do with it, right? So while being the member of a privileged group is unasked for, we don't choose how to be born, it's unearned, we didn't do anything to individually to create the society that has these structures, these things happened long before we were born, But what we do have a choice about, and what is an ethical choice, is then what we do given the reality of that privilege.